Hello, everybody. You are listening to the Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs, and I am your host, Shelby Oleschlager. Our mission here is to help entrepreneurs make a difference and navigate the messy world of startup or relaunch. Join me today where we dig deep with our guests to give you the best concepts and strategies to fast track your business. Today, our special guest is Lindsay. Lindsay, sorry, you're gonna have to say your last name.
Pinchuk. That's okay.
Sorry, I should have said that earlier. Lindsay Pinchuk is here. And Lindsay, I just want to give you a welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And to get started, please give us an introduction to what you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So I actually have started 2 startups. And the first time was not on purpose and the second time was. There's of course a lot to talk about, but what do I do? So the one sentence pitch of what I do is now I help founders and startups to build their own communities and to monetize them. And why do I do this? Because in 2010, I was pregnant and I was looking for support and community, and none of my friends were pregnant when I announced my pregnancy. We all have 5th grader or rising 6th graders now. I was just first. And there was really nowhere for me to meet and connect with other expectant women. And I was living in Chicago. We still live in the suburbs of Chicago, but I was living in downtown Chicago. My family's not here. I'm not from here. And there was really nowhere for me to find community. And I said to my husband, there has to be some kind of business in this. This is crazy. And there wasn't. And so I decided to start hosting events for expectant parents and really expectant moms at first. And we started hosting, we had a prenatal workout, and then we had a shopping event, and then people were like, what's next? What's next? And we started bringing in speakers, and I was pregnant. So I was really living in the business. You know, the business was for me. And over time, many more of my friends got pregnant, and Bump Club, which was the name of the company, Bump Club and Beyond, started to grow. And eventually what happened was I grew the business to reach 3 million people per month nationwide, actually in North America, because we did stuff in Canada too. And the community generated 7 figures in revenue year over year for the last 5 years that I owned it. And in 2019, I sold it. So I sold Bump Club to a large agency holding company. And then I ended up working for them for about 2.5 years. I exited last summer. And I decided that when I exited, I wanted to help other founders to do the same. And so now I work with companies, large and small, and individuals, both consulting and coaching on how to build communities for their own businesses.
Wow. I love it. I love how as an entrepreneur, it's so like when you're doing it for yourself, I find it's always going to be successful because you're filling that void that you really needed. Like you're solving that problem really for yourself. So I think that's really awesome. Let's backtrack and let's talk about what is a community.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a community the definition has evolved over time for sure. You know, I'm going to really date myself right now, but when I started Bump Club in 2010, you have to think about what you were doing in 2010, and there was no social media. So, there was Facebook. Facebook had kind of just come off of, it just came off of being part of like the EDU system. So like a couple years prior to me starting Bump Club, you had to have a .edu email address to use Facebook. So when I was starting Bump Club, I had a personal personal Facebook page, but not a company page. There were no business pages. There was no Instagram, no Snapchat, no TikTok, LinkedIn a little bit, but, and Twitter was really big. And so when I started my community, it really was in person. I mean, and really a large reason why I started Bump Club and Beyond was for a in real life, in-person community. I didn't want to be on message boards. I didn't want to use Meetup. I thought it was kind of cheesy. And I really was looking for people who were pregnant, like me, professionals living in Chicago. And so in the beginning, Bump Club was a real, it still is, but it started as a real life in-person community. So it was events. We gathered 2 times a month, and the digital component of it was email. It was our website, eventually social media, and that kind of grew with time. But for me, the definition of a community has and always will be, it is a 2-way street. And when you look at the people who follow you as a community, that means you're engaging with them, it means you're interacting with them. It means you're talking to them, you're conversing with them, and ultimately you're connecting with them. And in doing so, what happened was over time, people became familiar with me, my story, my pregnancy, and then they started transacting and coming to my events. Mm-hmm. And that just grew over time. And, eventually it got to a point where, I would be hosting an event in Carmel, Indiana, or, Orange County, and people would come to these events and they would say, I've been following you for years and I've followed both of your pregnancies. It's so nice to meet you. I had a connection with them.
Yeah.
And that's really what a community is. It's connection.
Mm-hmm. So when you're saying about building this audience, how was that like at first for you, as opposed to now, like when you were trying to build this community or build that relationship? Was there kind of like any struggles that you faced with putting yourself out there or building that relationship?
You have to remember, like I said, there was no social media at the time. So right. There were bloggers, mm-hmm. but there were no influencers. Like that wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing to, pick up your phone and go on camera, and like, that was not a thing. So for me, it wasn't like I had this grand plan. I didn't. And I didn't even really at the time realize what I was doing. But I was showing up at events, and in front of a room full of 100 expectant women, I would say, oh my God, like, I don't know about you guys, but my belly is so itchy, or my ankles are swollen. And, and it was the reality of the situation that I was connecting with these women. And so, no, to answer your question, I didn't have an issue with it. I really was just showing up and being myself. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, that's why and how I built a business. And now that I'm doing it again and building a community of female founders and a community for women who want to start businesses and, gather information, it's so easy for me to show up as myself because I've been showing up as myself for 12 years,
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And it's cool that it just kind of happened. And I find that it is like the ticket for success. If you just be your real self, you're going to attract the people that want that. And I think that is super powerful. So how was that transition like from doing these events to where you're in a position to sell it? Like, what was that journey like?
So that was also a very natural journey for me because I came from ad sales. So prior to me starting Bump Club, and actually the first year of owning Bump Club when I was pregnant, I was still working in my corporate job, and I was working at the Hearst Corporation. I was working for Good Housekeeping, but I had worked for brands like Redbook. I had worked for Sports Illustrated, Nickelodeon, selling, integrated marketing packages to Fortune 500 companies. So, I would work with the Targets and the General Mills and the Quaker Oats on big packages where they would buy ad space in our publication, and we would surround that ad buy with, sampling opportunities or other marketing capabilities. So, that was my background. And I have a degree in integrated marketing communications from Northwestern. And so that was just kind of how I always thought about things. So when I first started the events, we did 2 free events, and then we had a paid event, and it was a ticketed event. I remember I charged, I think, $50 for it. And the women that came to it was a dinner. The women who came to the dinner got a speaker. So we had like an expert speaker. I think it was a lactation consultant. And then they got dinner at this great restaurant in downtown Chicago. And then they walked away with a big gift bag. So that first dinner did not have a sponsor, but what it did have was this big gift bag. And the value of the bag was worth more than the ticket. And so in figuring out how I was going to sell this, I looked at the hospital classes, and I was like, what's the hospital offering? Well, the hospital was offering a class, and it maybe was just on breastfeeding. It didn't involve community and connection. It didn't involve a dinner. You didn't get a gift bag. So I wanted to make my product more worthwhile than the class at the hospital. And I did. And from there, the word of mouth really spread. And, the first dinner was 50 people, and the second dinner was 75, and then 100 and 125. And then we were at capacity, and we had wait lists, which was amazing. And so then what that allowed me to do is, in addition to selling the tickets, I was able to reach out to brands. And I would reach out to, I very specifically remember Great Go, the baby brand Great Go was my very first sponsor. It was either Graco and Summer Infant each sponsored like one of my first 2 dinners. And I reached out and I introduced myself and I said, I have this company and I have 100 expectant women coming to dinner. Would you like to sponsor it? And what I slowly learned in the baby space was that if you have an audience, if you have people who are expecting, who are listening to you, the brands want to be a part of it. It's a really hard demographic to reach. And I was reaching them. Mm-hmm. And so, basically these 2 brands said, name your price. And I did. And pricing is very, hit or miss. It's trial and error. And I kind of figured if I was aiming too high, they'd come back and negotiate, and they didn't. And so, from there, those sponsorships and those sponsorship opportunities and my prices and rates that just grew. And we started working with more brands, and we built upon the sponsorship piece of the revenue of Bump Club really by going to other brands and saying, well, look, Graco and Summer Infant are working with us. So, hey, Britax, hey, Bugaboo, hey, Up a Baby. And before long, almost every baby brand was working with Bump Club.
That's awesome. Just the collaboration of building that is so it just seems really authentic as well for exactly what you're doing. And I feel like brands would really resonate with that. So how has that transitioned into what you're doing now with you said you're helping other mothers or entrepreneurs building their brand and their business. So how has that journey been for you?
Yeah. So I'm doing 2 things actually. So I'm consulting. So I work with established companies. I mean, I've worked with companies that are startups, CPGs. I've worked with, apparel companies, 9-figure companies that are sold at Target. And I've worked with them on building their communities. And when I consult, obviously I do the work for them. I go into their company and we create solutions to grow their community. So that's kind of the first piece of what I do. The second piece of what I do is helping other entrepreneurs to get their businesses and build their communities so that they can get their businesses off the ground. Mm-hmm. Now, this has really transpired very naturally. Again, first and foremost, I have showed up as myself since I made this transition. And it was a really interesting transition because when I was still at Bump Club, I was the face of the Bump Club brand. So I was always on their social media. I mean, it was mine until it was bought, essentially. And I also had a Lindsay Pinchuk Instagram. So I had these 2 accounts. And the Lindsay Pinchuk Instagram was very much my personal life, my kids. I mean, there was no strategy behind it. It was by no means a business account. When I left Bump Club in the summer of 2021, I all of a sudden had to make that shift. Mm-hmm. And you very clearly can see that shift on my Instagram. If you scroll back to last summer, you'll see my new logo across the grid. And that's where I started showing up and sharing tips and sharing my story and talking about what I did for Bump Club and how I sold it and really being authentic as an entrepreneur, just as I did as an expectant parent. And from there, I did what I tell all of my clients to do, which is you have to send an email out and let people know what you're doing. So I did that, got some clients, and then I started teaching a couple of classes. And once I started seeing results, it was very easy to start sharing those results. And you really build upon that, just how I did with Bump Club. I was building upon the results as a consultant, as a coach, word of mouth, my reputation. Mm-hmm. And from there, I also launched a podcast. So I launched a podcast called Dear Found Her, which very, very strategically is the backbone of my marketing, my thought leadership. Twice a week, I talk to a big female founder, and I've had really big names on the podcast, and very strategic. I mean, once I talk to a founder, they share the podcast. So that's drawn a lot of attention to my podcast. I also, of course, very similar to how I did with the sponsorships at Bump Club, I'll say I'm actually working really hard to get a very big name on my podcast at the moment. And I was able to reach out to the representation and say, well, look, I've had so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so on my podcast. So I'd love to have your client as well. And it was seamless because I'm building upon the experience that I've already had in the last 6 months. So a lot of these skills are very transferable.
Mm-hmm. That actually reminds me just what you said earlier about getting sponsors for Bump Club. It's the same idea. It's like, well, I had these people, so then you're able to get more, and it just keeps rolling and keeps rolling. So that's very powerful. For your consulting and coaching, how, like now that you're here, what are kind of like the next goals that you'd like to take this business?
Yeah. So my big thing is that I have a class that I've taught. And I've taught it in two different ways. One, it's basically, the class is marketing for small business. It's building a community marketing for small business. Mm-hmm. And I did it one way over 6 weeks. And the feedback I got was that people wanted more time. They wanted more time with me. And then I did it one way over 12 weeks. And I've learned a lot about my capabilities as a teacher, just how people want to consume what I'm sharing. And I've asked the people that have taken the class for feedback, and their feedback has been instrumental in terms of shifting how I'm teaching it and how long it is and what I'm teaching and what I'm including. So my big goal is really to hit a sweet spot. And I think it's going to be, somewhere in the middle of those 6 weeks and 12 weeks, and grow this class, because I want as many people to gain from my knowledge as possible. Mm-hmm. And, very different. There are a lot of people out there on the internet who, are trying to coach people and trying to help people and, claiming they can get you 10,000 followers or $10,000 in the first month. And like those, that doesn't exist. And those are really actually red flags. And I bet you that if you dig deep into a lot of those promises and those profiles, you will find that a lot of the people behind them don't have the experience that lends itself to making those claims. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that I do have that is very different than many people out there is I started a business from nothing. I bootstrapped it. I grew it. I scaled it, and I sold it. And I have the track record, and I have built a community from nothing to 3 million people a month. And so, I share that because I think it's so important that you really look at who you're consuming from, whether you're paying for it or not, because if the people that you're consuming from are not practicing in the way they're preaching, then what does that say for how they're going to help you? Mm-hmm. And so, I very much want to take this class and my knowledge and share it with as many people as possible. I know I can save people a ton of time. I already have. That's the feedback that I'm getting. And I want people to not make the mistakes that I did and to learn from the mistakes that I did.
Yeah. And that only comes from you having gone through that experience yourself. Right. And
exactly.
I feel like, to me, I would feel that value as well, where it's like this woman has gone through exactly where I want to go. And they always say, like, find a mentor or coach that has walked that path. And that is so important to really be sharing that. So just to go back a little bit, I'm curious, do you have any couple tips that you've noticed that people either struggle with that you can give us when they're trying to build their community? Is there a couple things that people struggle with?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing that people struggle with is they really focus on that vanity number. Mm-hmm. And, they get hung up. Well, like it's not growing, and like, it's taking so much time, and, mm-hmm. and I'm spinning my wheels making content and blah, blah, blah. And, the first thing is really stop focusing on the number. The number will grow over time, and really and truly, it doesn't matter. You could have thousands and thousands and thousands of followers, but if they're not connecting with you and they're not, really building that engagement, it doesn't matter. They're not going to transact with you anyway. My 11-year-old knows how to build a TikTok account better than I do. I mean, she has, 5, 6, 7,000 followers on her TikTok. Wow. She shows pictures of her shampoo. You know what I mean? She doesn't know how to run a business, and she doesn't have anyone transacting. She just wants followers. So, it's very different. There's very different reasons for being on social media. So my first would be really forget the number, show up as yourself, focus on being authentic and real and connecting with people first and foremost. That's probably my first tip for people who are growing a community. I have so many tips for people growing a community. I'm trying to think of what I want to say next. So the number. Secondary would be to pick 2 social media platforms. I think the biggest hang up that I see amongst business owners also, like I said, is they're like, oh, there's just so much out there to manage. And get good at two things. Get good at two things. And then once you're good at those two things, take the content from those two platforms and repurpose them on other platforms. Do not spin your wheels making original content for 8 different social media platforms. You won't be able to focus on your business. That's not feasible, especially if you're a solopreneur. So what I tell my clients all the time is start with one piece of content. So whether it's a blog post or whether it's an Instagram post, put that piece of content out there. And then think of all the different ways that you can post it and share it other places. This is really what I work on at great length with my clients. And figure out ways that you can repurpose it and share it differently, because you will come up with probably 30 to 50 of them. And that will last you so much time. It will save you so much time. Mm-hmm. And it's more about being efficient and having a process than it is putting content out there, if that makes sense. Like half of it is just having a process of efficiency so that you're not spinning your wheels over and over, because you want to be concentrating on your bottom line. You don't want to be concentrating on all the content that you need to put out.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Was that kind of something that you went through as well as a roadblock of being strategic with that sort of stuff?
I think, yes, I really learned as I went with social media, and I was the person who handled Bump Club social media for 10 years.
Wow.
Even after we were sold. And I was supposed to get some help and assistance there, and I didn't. And I went through the whole pandemic running our social media, amongst other things. And, a lot of what I did was recreating and repurposing our content. And I just kind of taught myself that. And now as I'm doing it for other clients, it's so funny because I often, even like, I have a 9-figure client, okay, who's like a huge brand. And I went into their brand and I went into their social media, and they didn't even have a social media manager. They had someone like doing their Instagram as a part of like another job. And that can't be, not for a brand that size. And I got there and I started my process. And in a matter of 2 weeks, they're seeing triple-digit increases on reach and engagement. We're sharing more posts than ever before. I think they were sharing maybe 3 to 5 a week, and now we're sharing about 10 to 15 a week. But it's very much in line with my process, which is repurposing, which is sharing content. And I learned that at Bump Club because it was just me. And people didn't believe me at Bump Club. They would be like, what do you mean it's just you churning out all this content? And I was like, because I have a process. Mm-hmm. I have a process for repurposing and for being efficient, and anyone can do it. But once you're like hung up and you're in that headspace of like, oh God, I have like so much to do, you're not going to get it done. So yeah, I mean, I guess it was a roadblock, but it was a roadblock that I worked through as I needed to at Bump Club.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like that's like such a good way to learn as well. I mean, it probably took too long to learn that. It would have been good if someone taught you that. Right.
But now I know, right? And so like now I'm building this community way faster, and I'm now able to help others build their community and say, hey, like this is what you're doing wrong. And this is what you need to be doing in order to be reaping the benefits of your community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how are the ways that some people can leverage their community? Either maybe their community is their only business, or it's like a byproduct of their business, but how can they really leverage it to the best of their abilities?
Yes. So there's a couple of things that I always say. So one, when you have a community who trusts you and who believes in you, you can ask them really to do anything, which is amazing, right? So you can ask your community to share things for you. You can ask them to rate and review you. You can ask them to tag friends and like let them know what you're doing, right? I mean, like these are all things that you can do when you have a trusted community. The other thing too is you can use your community to garner partnerships. And that is something that I think is huge, not just in terms of building your community, but building your business. So when you have a community who trusts you and who believes in you and who engages and interacts with you, it's so much easier to go out to a brand who complements yours and say, hey, like, this is what I do, and this is who I reach, and this is who I talk to every day. And I know that you talk to similar people. What if we did X, Y, and Z together and leveraged our communities to grow our businesses together? And it is so much easier to do that when you have this trusted community versus just an audience or a number. I've had so many people over the years interview me, share my interview, and they have hundreds of thousands of followers. And guess what? It does nothing because they don't have a community. You know, and so it's when you have that community, it really is endless what you can do to leverage your community for bottom line business growth.
I'm just curious for myself, like when you're saying community, are you talking about like on social media? Are you talking about the email list? Like where are these people? Everything.
So the way that I explain it is your community is your number one asset, right? So like your community is everything. Your content is your number one tool. And so you're using your content to build your community, to engage with your community, to nurture your community. And your content is your social media, your website, any publicity appearances like this. I mean, this is content, you know, this is content that I would use, that you would use, your email list, your website. I don't know if I said website already. And then anything you do live and in person. So like when I do a speaking engagement, or if I'm, you know, called to be at an event, or if I host an event, like all of that stuff lends itself to my content, which I then feed back to my community. And all of those things need to be working together. Social media is just one piece of it. And I think that's a really big mistake too, that a lot of people are like, oh, it's just my social. But honest to God, like if you have great community offline, your online community will follow, and vice versa. Right. So like it just all needs to be working together. And your email list, to your point, is so important because you own it. You know, I was hacked this year on Instagram, and it was, when I tell you, I was in the fetal position in bed on a Saturday, because it happened on a Friday night. I was like throwing up sick because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get this back. I did get it back. But it was devastating to me. And I felt so violated, and I was like, oh God, like I really am just relying too much on Meta. And I'm trying very hard to grow my email list, because I do see a lot of transactions come off of my email, way more so than my social media.
Yeah. And it's kind of true. It's like, there's the level of priority, or like the top ones definitely or your email being one of the top. But yeah, I heard a few people that happening of their social media, and it's definitely a wake up call to just realize, like you said, you don't own that. And that's huge. So I don't want to ask a couple more questions.
You can ask me whatever you want. I have time.
This is a great conversation. I'm just curious, like, so how would one, let's say that they have this community, they don't want to do like events, but how are they planning on monetizing it? Like, do you have clients that do like memberships, or they do, you said like maybe a big event once a week or once a month? Like what type of structures do you recommend?
So I think it depends on the business, right? I mean, if you have like an actual product that you're selling, I do not think you should be discounting the community aspect. Like every product needs a community as well. So whether you're a service or a product, and, you know, I think about like Peloton, for example, I know that's like a pie in the sky brand, right? But like, think about what they do. I mean, they do offer a service, but they have a product that they sell, and it's built upon community. And so, you know, I always tell, like, for example, I have this apparel company that I'm working with, and they didn't have any engagement with their followers, and now they do. And they're seeing natural transactions come just by the lift in the engagement that we're experiencing online. So, you know, I don't want people to write that off, but your question specifically is for service-based businesses. And so there are so many different ways that you can monetize it. You can teach a class, you know, I mean, I'm teaching a class, and I talk about it on my social media when I'm going to be launching it, when I'm going to be teaching it. I share, I do, you know, a couple of free seminars usually leading up to it. And that's a really great way to make some money. And, you know, whatever your niche is, your expertise is, you really have to obviously hone in and be specific about it, but you can teach a class, you can do a membership. Patreon is a great website for building a membership. it's funny that you bring that up because I thought I wanted to do a membership with Dear Found Her, and I set it up, and then I realized that I don't think I have enough scale yet to make it worth my while. And so I think it will come with time for sure, but it was a eye opener for me in terms of like putting the cart before the horse, because I didn't want to spin my wheels doing all this work for a membership when if I had 5 or 10 members, So I think that will come with time. How else do I think you could do a webinar? You can sell your services one-on-one. And this is another really good example. So I started this second part of my business as consulting agency, and I started consulting. That's really what I started doing first last September, in September 2021. I started my podcast, and then I started this class that I've now taught twice. And I listened to my community. And now that is that is why I'm coaching people one-on-one. That was not necessarily something that I was planning to do. But when I was setting up my class, a lot of people came to me and they said, do you have a one-on-one coaching option? Because I would pay you for that. And I was like, oh, like I don't just need to do it in a group setting. And that's a great offering and it's great for scale. But if someone's willing to pay me a premium for my time. And so I sat down and figured out how that would look, how much I would charge to make it worth my while. Within a week, I got 4 clients. So, and I capped it because I was like, it's a part of my business. Right. So I think you really have to listen to your community and what they want from you. I think that is, that they can tell you probably better than anyone. You think you know what you want to do, but if no one's going to buy it, then it doesn't matter. Right. But if your community is telling you, I want your time one-on-one, so create it, build it.
Yeah, exactly. And just that idea of like putting the cart before the horse. I personally experienced that where, it's like, is this worth my time if I don't have that following just yet? You don't want to be wasting time for a couple people. Not saying that those people are important, but it's a lot of effort for that membership. So I like the idea of teaching a class. When you're like planning these classes, is it structured to be like a Q&A style? Is that something that you like to do with your groups, or is it you have like an actual, like a school class?
So I do build in a Q&A to all of my classes, usually 1 or 2. But I have like a curriculum that I built that I teach, and it's very similar to my one-on-one coaching curriculum. But it's not as specific, obviously, because when I'm talking to you one-on-one, we're going to make it really tailored to your business. Nice. So it's a group setting. I personally like to teach on Zoom. I like to teach live. I like to show up. Part of that is because when I was starting my podcast, I bought 2 different classes, and one of the classes I bought was like a module class that you had to like go through and on your own. And I never did it. I mean, I never did it. And then I found this other class with this lady who has an amazing podcast. And this also goes back to knowing who you're learning from, because the first woman had like a fine podcast. This second woman had like a podcast empire. Okay. And so like, obviously you want to learn from the girl with the podcast empire, right? So she taught a class live. I think it was 8 weeks. And every Monday we showed up. She gave 2 hours of her time live. And I showed up every week without fail because I did not want to miss the live energy that she brought to this class. And within 8 weeks, I had a podcast set up. And from that experience, I was like, if I'm going to teach something, I want it to be live. Yes, people can watch the replay if they want, but if I'm going to be giving my time and I'm going to be teaching, I want to interact and engage with people. And I don't care if it's not recorded. And, everything's recorded. I can build it into a module structure later, right? And people can buy it for less later. But if people are going to pay for me, I want to be there live and in person. And so it's live. I teach it in Zoom. I do once a week for 90 minutes. And then we do a Q&A as one of the sessions. And then in between, I have a private Facebook group where I give homework. I have them post their homework. We build community. And a lot of these women start working together, which is amazing. Like when I see them doing collaborations on social media together, that's like the best.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do usually a Q&A at the end. So, but I do have a curriculum that I teach.
Yeah. That's awesome. This is like so much information, and I really appreciate you sharing all this. For people listening that want to follow you or learn more, or maybe get your services, where can they find you?
So you can go to @Lindsay Pinchuk on Instagram. I have a public profile. It's me. It's not a virtual assistant. You can also go to lindsaypinchuk.com and everything is there, everything that I offer.
Okay, perfect. One final thing, just to leave listeners with something to think about. Do you have one final piece of advice that you'd like us all to leave this conversation with?
Yeah, just don't wait. I just do it. Like seriously, just if you have an idea and you think you want to do something, just do it, because there's never a perfect time. I launched a business when I was pregnant, and like that was like the less than ideal time. Even though it was for pregnant people, I could have been like, oh, I'm going to wait until like after the baby comes. If I would have done that, I never would have started the business, So you really just have to get started, figure it out along the way. There's going to be bumps in the road. It's never going to be a perfect time, but you're never going to know unless you start it and put yourself out there.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. I love it. So true. Just do it. Don't wait.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I want to say thank you just on behalf of myself for this conversation, Lindsay. This has been really insightful for me, and hopefully people listening that are looking to take their community more seriously, that they learn a lot from you today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Mm-hmm.